In South Africa, there is a kind of silence that speaks louder than noise, a silence that settles in places where people avoid certain topics, where the same names surface again and again, and where the truth feels deliberately buried for years. For a long time, no one truly knew what happened to Jerry Boshoga, and his name was spoken in hushed tones, raised only in private moments when people felt safe enough to ask questions without being heard. Rumors moved quietly, fragments of information passed from one person to another, but nothing solid ever emerged, and that uncertainty became part of everyday life. Then, unexpectedly, someone spoke, and that single moment shifted everything for those who had been following Jerry Boshoga's story. What unfolded was no longer just about one individual or a single event, it became a reflection of what happens when power, fear, and perseverance collide in South Africa. It revealed how long people are forced to wait for answers and how that waiting places enormous pressure on families, communities, and even those responsible for providing the truth. Before the story reached this point, something said quietly, almost in secret, triggered consequences that could no longer be contained, forcing the entire country to pay attention. As people began to reflect on what was finally coming to light, many asked a deeper question about who the truth truly serves in South Africa. This was not the first time South Africans had experienced something like this. A scandal dominates conversations, officials shuffle papers, leadership changes hands, time moves on, and eventually the noise fades. Yet for those who cared about Jerry Boshoga, forgetting was never an option. Waiting years for justice has a way of changing how people think, especially when the answers arrive late or feel incomplete, leaving families to wonder whether closure can still mean anything after so much time has passed. Jerry Boshoga's name lingered not because headlines kept it alive, but because ordinary people refused to stop asking questions. In township homes, at family gatherings, and at taxi ranks, the same question echoed repeatedly: how could a case with so many inconsistencies remain unresolved for so long? At first, the reaction was confusion rather than anger, but confusion slowly hardened into suspicion, and in South Africa, suspicion rarely stays silent. A familiar pattern began to emerge, one people recognized all too well: when powerful figures are involved, progress slows, language becomes cautious and legalistic, and accountability feels increasingly distant. Life continues on the surface, but beneath it lies a heavy burden of uncertainty carried by families waiting for answers and communities speculating about what is being hidden. Gradually, trust in the system erodes, and that loss of trust affects how people view the police, the courts, and the promises made by leaders. This was never just another story destined to disappear. The Jerry Boshoga case forced people to confront uncomfortable questions about whether justice is applied equally. Each time the story resurfaced, small details failed to align, dates shifted, statements contradicted one another, and while each inconsistency seemed minor on its own, together they painted a troubling picture. Investigators noticed, journalists noticed, and ordinary citizens paying close attention noticed too, and once these threads were connected, silence became impossible. For those in positions of authority, the pressure intensified, because public office is not merely a title but a constant exposure to scrutiny, where every word is examined and every delay fuels doubt. As time passed without clear answers, credibility suffered, and families remained trapped in limbo, denied closure and certainty. The strain of prolonged uncertainty revealed how deeply delays in justice affect the national psyche, turning the phrase "justice delayed" into a lived reality rather than an abstract idea. Then, without fanfare, something small shifted, something that did not initially make headlines but quietly altered the course of the story. Minor details once overlooked gained significance, prompting people to reconsider what they thought they knew, and once perspectives changed, there was no returning to the old narrative. Power complicated everything, as it often does, especially when accountability threatens those close to decision-makers, and the pace at which truth emerged seemed dictated not only by facts but by calculations about consequences, alliances, and institutional self-preservation. South Africans recognized this pattern because they had seen it before, and then something unexpected happened. A confession surfaced, simple, measured, and impossible to ignore. For some, it brought a sense of relief; for others, it raised even more doubts, serving as a reminder that truth has a way of emerging no matter how long it is delayed. The confession did not provide all the answers people hoped for; instead, it deepened the mystery, making what was left unsaid as significant as what was spoken. The careful choice of words suggested caution, perhaps fear, and institutions felt the pressure as their credibility was tested. People judged them not by their statements but by their actions, and reactions across the country ranged from cautious optimism to frustration and exhaustion after years of uncertainty. These emotions mattered because they shaped how South Africans viewed justice and authority moving forward. While the law demands careful procedure and patience, the public's desire for swift resolution clashed with the slow, methodical nature of legal processes, creating tension that determined whether trust would be rebuilt or further damaged. For leaders, even a single misstep could overshadow years of service, influencing public perception and shaping how young South Africans viewed accountability. The case became emblematic of a broader systemic issue, one where allegations linger for years before action is taken, often only after sustained public pressure. Each repetition of this pattern weakened confidence, yet every genuine effort to address it offered a fragile sense of hope. Trust, after all, is not restored through apologies or isolated arrests but through consistent transparency and accountability that endure beyond media attention. People watch closely to see what would happen once cameras moved on, knowing that real change is measured by what occurs in silence rather than spectacle. The Jerry Boshoga case ultimately became about the future as much as the past, about whether truth and accountability would prevail or fade once more into obscurity. South Africa has learned that truth does not operate on deadlines; it emerges when people persist, when questions refuse to die, and when silence is challenged. For many citizens, the central concern remained deeply personal: does the system truly work for people like them? When faith in institutions falters, cynicism grows, and rebuilding trust becomes far harder than maintaining it. What happens next carries more weight than what has already occurred, because people are not demanding perfection but honesty, fairness, and courage from those entrusted with power. The responsibility now rests with investigators, institutions, and leaders, whose decisions will shape not only this case but the broader culture of accountability, influencing whether whistleblowers feel protected and whether justice feels real. Justice, in this sense, is not merely about closure but about restoring a sense of safety and dignity, affirming that the years spent waiting were not meaningless and that unanswered questions were never insignificant. South Africa has faced moments like this before, sometimes emerging stronger, sometimes slipping back into familiar patterns, and the outcome now depends on whether those in power choose integrity over self-preservation. This chapter of the story may be nearing its end, but its consequences are only beginning to unfold, and justice will remain central to what follows, as these are the stories that ultimately shape a nation and define its future.